Hello, welcome back. This is Paolo Messina. This is Conversations in Artificial Intelligence. So today we're going to look at how companies around the world, I would say more of the traditional companies, are trying to integrate artificial intelligence in their existing processes, or they're trying to improve processes around the world. And to do this, we're going to look into someone who is really an expert in the field. So with me today, we have Ofer Shai, who is the Chief AI Officer for Omnia AI, branch of Deloitte Consulting based in Canada. Hello, Ofer. How are you today?
Hi, Paolo. I'm great. How are you doing?
I'm very good. Thank you so much for being here today, and so excited to talk about these topics. Before we go into AI, I'd like to ask you something very simple. How did you get involved into artificial intelligence?
I've been a geek my whole life. I've always been fascinated by computers and computer science. It was clear to me that's what I'm going to study when I went to university. And during my undergrad studies, I got involved with Professor Pedwich at the University of Alberta, studying some early versions of machine learning that got my taste of machine learning there. When it came time to grad school, it was pretty obvious to me what I was going to study.
What was the transition from the academia to industry like?
Yeah, so the funny thing is, when I finished my PhD, nobody here in Toronto really cared that I knew machine learning. It wasn't very popular at the time. So I ended up working at IBM on the compilers technology there. And as machine learning and AI started heating up again, I joined startups and started using my background in machine learning a lot more. It's very different. In academia, we would spend weeks and months at a time trying to solve one particular problem and the best of our ability and show and push the state of the art to its limits. In industry, it's all about getting stuff to work. It's all about getting the results and the product that you want to be able to deliver value to your clients, to your customers. So when I was optimizing search engines, every little improvement would go into production, and we would then see how that affects our clients and customers' usage. When I was doing recommendation engines, same thing. It's not about trying to absolutely push the state of the art, but rather get a recommendation engine that's useful to your users and then have them use it in a way that makes sense.
So you work for this branch of Deloitte, it's called Omnia AI. Can you tell us something a little bit about it and how it's related to Deloitte?
Of course. So Omnia AI is part of Deloitte. We are a team within Deloitte that's focused on delivering analytics and AI use cases to our clients. We help them on the journey from really end to end. So from the time that the CEOs went to some conference and heard that there's this new thing called AI that they have to think about, trying to figure out how to integrate AI into the company. What are the use cases that make sense? Where should they start? Through the data transformations, which is where we tend to spend actually a lot of time. Data science is still largely data today. And most companies, especially well-established legacy companies, their data is just a mess. It's not organized well. It's there if they're lucky, but getting it to a state where it can actually be used by these AI systems is a big challenge. We then help them with developing their AI use cases and ultimately in production and how to think about the development around all that as well. So Omnia really is capturing sort of the end-to-end journey for our clients.
When you look at this problem of fragmentation and not having, or maybe not even collecting data, is there a difference between or among industries, or it's more like something that has to do with the size of the company? So which ones at high level are companies that are more ready?
It certainly varies. It's the size of the company, it's the age of the company. Just to give you a sense of how bad things are, in one of the projects we did, the client indicated that the data is ready to be used for AI and we're good to go. And what they meant by that is that it's all stored in Excel files on people's laptops. We had to collect all that and get that into a database and actually create the pipelines to make sure that future data then flows through the system properly. In Canada, certainly what we see, the banking industry tends to be ahead of the curve, with retail, mining, public sector, and health trailing it. They've been on these digital journeys for a longer time. They've been thinking about analytics and data much longer than many of the other industries that are now realizing that if they don't get behind the wheel, then their challenges are going to keep growing in terms of ability to just service their customers.
So if you have to, at high level, saying which ones are the sectors, industrial sectors that are lagging behind in terms of, data infrastructures and ability to capture data and organize them, is there like a rule of thumb that you would come up with?
I can speak specifically in Canada. I would say the mining and resources industries are lagging for sure. And the other challenge we see is with healthcare, maybe not from an infrastructure perspective, but from data sharing and data usage perspective, the challenges.
When and why it makes sense for companies to go into customized solutions and end-to-end solutions?
A lot of our enterprise clients are looking at custom solutions because out-of-the-box solutions just don't tend to work for them. Even when you look at something as simple as vision offerings on the cloud, certainly the cloud providers have gone to the trouble of creating APIs and services around a lot of common use cases, but that's not going to address the specific needs of companies. For example, one of the projects we're doing right now is looking at engineering drawings and extracting information from it. We are using some out-of-the-box capabilities like OCR, but in terms of, it's not looking at objects or faces that are sort of more common use cases. We're looking at very specific engineering drawings and trying to extract information out of those. We need custom solutions for that. It tends to be, certainly in our work, and because of just the nature of the conversations that we have with our clients, out-of-the-box solutions are not something we tend to use because otherwise companies probably not coming to us to do it.
What you have seen is that out of these startups, there is like the large companies have a reluctance to use the solutions, or you have seen that the solutions that comes up, they are too much, I would say, atomic level, and they cannot be integrated into a process. And so you need somebody that, like most companies, really need the process integration as opposed to just to leveraging one atomic solution, like the most advanced, visual AI type of visual classifications and so on.
I think it's a combination of three things, two of which you touched on. So first of all, there is a reluctance to work with startups for bigger companies, just because startups are notorious for disappearing because the funding runs out, or pivoting to a different industry when things are not going well. So not having that confidence that the startup will necessarily going to be there in the time to come, or have the right qualifications, even if they say they can do something and they show a great demo, but they haven't actually done it before with another big company. So nobody wants to be the first one and be the guinea pig for the startup and take that chance. Another challenge is in the integration, as you mentioned. So again, companies don't want to have 3 or 4 or 10 different apps to do the different things that they need to do. They want one integrated solution where their employees can interact with the systems at a single point of contact. The other, and finally, the last challenge is in understanding the real problems of the enterprise. I found, and myself in my own background in startups, I see it today in a very different light. We didn't always understand what are the problems that we're solving for. We thought we were solving a particular set of problems. A lot of them are focused on the AI challenges and the modeling challenges. I've had a lot of startups that we've talked to show me how wonderful their researchers are and how much they can beat the state of the art. But that's not really the problems and the challenges that enterprises are facing. As I said, it's a lot more around the strategy, a lot more around integration, and pipelines, and data.
When you look at projects in artificial intelligence, unlike the traditional, if you like, software development projects, there are quite a bit of differences. But one difference that it comes to my mind that I think is relevant to this conversation is that the first version of artificial intelligence is usually like a baby. It's step number one. And then this baby usually, depending on the type of solution, but it usually needs to learn over time and kind of evolve. So if you think of it, in places like the ones we're working in Silicon Valley, where we tend to have, data science teams and several people working, this second part of the process where we maintain the intelligence and grow the intelligence over time and perfect the intelligence over time is a significant part of the operations. So how does it work when the entity that does this work is actually, it's a consulting or it's a third party provider?
Yeah, so there's a couple of avenues that we've used in the past. One is where you set up automated feedback loops and regular retraining of the algorithms and models. That one requires a significant amount of governance and making sure that our clients understand what their role is in that feedback loop. We don't ever want a model just going out into a production system without having gone through the proper vetting. So we try to shy away from cases where, online learning where things are constantly changing. I probably don't need to point you to examples of famous cases where that's gone wrong. The other avenue that we use is something called managed services, where even after the initial delivery, we would stay and provide that level of support and retraining and adjustments.
If there is a constant need for, I'd say, a follow-up, follow-on from a business perspective, implies that you had to maintain a workforce that for each project, has to do a follow-up. So from a business perspective means you have to, have an investment on keeping people on board that do this follow-up. I want just to pick up your mind on that aspect, on that operational aspect. How does it work? When it becomes an important element of planning, and when, for any companies out there that is trying to implement these solutions.
So you're right that this is not your typical software development project, but a lot of elements from software development can be applied to data science and AI, sometimes against people's wishes. I've had to work often with data scientists who didn't want to follow proper agile procedures and planning, and they thought they can just work on the models. It helps when you get them into the fold, working closely with the engineers to co-build and co-deliver rather than thinking of themselves as something separate from that process. That being said, yeah, absolutely, it goes into our planning in terms of ongoing support, ongoing maintenance, just like you would have requirements around DevOps to maintain systems and make sure that uptime for your servers is kept. It's the same thing with the data science. We commit to certain SLAs around how often models need to be retrained and redeployed, and just plan around that.
So I would like for at least once going to some specific example of applications of, if you like, end-to-end solutions. And I was thinking of the sector of computer vision. It's probably one of the AI sectors where we have seen the most transformational technologies, with deep learning having a lot of impact. We're seeing all what's happening in the autonomous driving market. And those are the things that are fancy. Those are the things that gets audience both on the television, on the YouTube. But there is an entire world in the industrial applications. And I'd like to maybe you telling us a little bit more about examples of applications in the industrial compound of the new development in computer vision.
Yeah, so computer vision is interesting. As you said, it's very intuitive. It captures people's imagination. It's not, I wouldn't say that it's where a lot of our focus is, just because the nature of the clients that we work with, it's a lot more around document processing and NLP, a lot more around traditional data analytics and traditional data processing and structured data, if you will. Where we do see computer vision come into play is in very specific use cases that tends to be relevant to the specific client. But that being said, we've also seen applications more broadly in retail around store management and customer management. We've seen it in more and more, we're seeing that now in industry around maintenance. So rather than using expensive sensors, You can use much cheaper cameras to literally just take pictures of your systems, whether it's trains, whether it's machines in an industrial complex, to do maintenance, to do asset management, and those kind of use cases.
Why it's possible to implement those use cases today?
Two things. So first of all, yes, absolutely. Deep learning has transformed computer vision completely in the last 9 years. I think that's just one aspect of things. So our algorithms are getting better. What we've done, for example, in maintenance, we have a device, kind of like a train that runs along the tracks and takes pictures of the ground and the tracks in front of it, and literally identifies defects in the rail that needs to be maintained. Another one sits beside the track and takes pictures of the trains that are running by of the wheels and identifies where wheels need to be maintained and changed. We've seen with the deployment of this, we've seen a reduction of 85% in the efforts around maintenance, while at the same time getting an uptime of more than 70% increase. So spending less on actually maintaining and spending the right dollars in the right place. Certainly the algorithms that we use behind the scenes partially take advantage of deep learning improvements that we've seen, but a big part of it is also just the awareness and the focus that industry has on AI. A lot of the stuff that we're doing, maybe not so much in computer vision, but more broadly in AI, is stuff we could have done 10, 15, 20 years ago. CNNs have been around since the late 80s. LSTMs have been around since the 90s. A lot of this stuff is not new. We've had decent entity extraction capabilities for a good 10 years now. Sure, they've been getting a lot better due to technology and algorithms and more importantly, data. But in terms of getting all that into industry, it's really just a mindset. So a lot of the problems that we're solving today could have been solved a lot sooner, but the focus and attention to this field of AI just wasn't there.
So when you look at, for example, the solution that you mentioned before, and that is basically a computer vision that is used to see when I had to repair the wheels for a wagon on a train. Some of the economics benefits that you mentioned is basically reduction of cost in maintenance and also reduction of uptime, downtime for the trains and so on. How much of the driver for this project is actually the business objective?
For successful projects, the business alignment is 100%. When we don't have that, when we don't have a clear view of what the ROI is on the project, of what the technology is going to do, more often than not, the project stops or shuts down after an initial POC or initial demonstration where what we call a science experiment. It's great that you can predict this thing about customer churn, but if I can't tie that directly to how I'm going to make money, nobody's going to invest in it to flush it out more. So when I mentioned before about the end-to-end journey, that's a lot of what work that we do through the strategy arm of Omnia, is helping businesses figure out not just how to set up potentially their own teams to do data science, but which problems make more sense to tackle, what that ROI is going to look like, and how you're going to go about doing it. So I would say for successful projects, they have to have that alignment from the business.
So you said that a lot of the work going on is around the realm of documentation and so on. Can you help us understand if there is a trend on business benefits that were not possible before and that are possible today? Where is the pain?
A lot of companies, especially the legacy older companies, have a lot of their data information locked up in documents, basically. Either internal memos, emails, internal emails, it can be customer complaints, it can be legal documents. A lot of the information is just locked up in those documents. In particular, in the legal space, we've been spending a lot of time and effort. We've actually have our own product around processing and analyzing legal documents. A lot of times signed contracts are, again, sitting on people's laptops and folders where, with a printed archive in a drawer. Companies in some cases don't even know whether all their contracts have been upheld and if they even got paid for all their contracts that they've delivered. there's lots and lots of use cases around that space that we've been working on. Especially in another common use case that we see is with regulation changes, especially things like GDPR, LIBOR changes for the banks. Companies have to go back and renegotiate in some cases, or just reissue thousands of contracts potentially. Going through them and understanding which ones need to be changed, which ones need to be amended, and how is a huge undertaking that we've been tackling with NLP. It's quite successfully for the most part. It's the kind of automation, it's the kind of organization that wasn't possible before, just because humans get distracted, if you will. So in some cases we see undertakings. Okay, we need to organize all these documents that we have. We've tried this before, and every time you get through 80-90% of the work, and then other things become more important. And it never gets completed properly and never gets rolled out properly. Now with automation around NLP, this is becoming possible.
So one part of applying artificial intelligence to problems that have to do with handling document could be just getting an analytics of what I have, like what type of things I have, what type of documents I have. That's one stage. Another level, it could be to simplify processes. Like, for example, you were saying, helping or augmenting human beings in identifying what documents need a change. Another thing could also be leveraging existing knowledge to save working hours. Can you speak about those, if you like, the difference between looking at data and just knowing what I have with respect to instead utilizing the machine learning to improve processes where human beings are connected?
Let me just try to unpack that a little bit. So even when we're talking about things like organizing your inventory of documents and contracts, that's in the service of improving your processes, making things more efficient, and ultimately saving human effort down the line. So even something like that, we don't do that for its own sake. In terms of the human hour saving, it's a bit ironic. I find we've kind of come a full circle. So, the promise of AI is to automate and reduce human effort in a lot of cases, but we spend a lot of time and effort on annotating data. Now the humans, instead of doing the jobs, they're creating the data to train the machines to do the jobs that they would have done otherwise. That being said, there's absolutely huge time savings that we see. In the case of something like contract negotiations, we've seen 60 to 70% reduction of human effort in terms of the number of hours required to deliver the full renegotiation of contracts. Again, we're talking about thousands of contracts that need to be addressed and amended. In the case of, you mentioned chatbots before. Typical reductions that we see there is taking a call center with 250, 300 people, reducing that to 50 or 60 people, with the chatbots addressing sort of 60 to 70% of the most common use cases, and then humans taking on the more challenging ones. So there's absolutely huge reductions in effort. That always brings up the question of, are the machines going to take my job away? I think to some degree, the answer is yes, but it's also creating a lot of jobs. If you look over the last 5 years, already we've seen AI is taking over certain jobs, and yet we keep seeing more and more new kinds of jobs coming up that are related to AI and machine vision and machine learning. We live in a world where there's constant pace of change, and we're seeing that in the job market as well.
For the knowledge worker, like for example, when you talk about the contract negotiation, so I guess a lot of the time for knowledge workers would go into researching things, typing stuff, and so what we're seeing right now, based on what you're saying before, is that some of this time gets freed up to do other things. Have you come across use cases where today was not possible to improve, if you like, there is an intrinsic limitation in the in the degree of ability that natural language processing has today?
Yeah, certainly some of the biggest challenges around NLP, I would say, is just the amount of data they can process. When you look at some of the bigger networks, more popular networks, we're limited to essentially paragraph level analysis. In order to go beyond that to full document analysis, you start looking at something like XLNet, which is an absolute beast and very hard for it to run on any decent computing hardware unless you kind of go into the very top end. That keeps it out of reach for most use cases and for most companies. I would like to see, our ability to process longer and longer documents and the ability to kind of carry that signal forward through the entire document and keep that context. I think that's one place where we might see still a lot of advancement over the next few years. And that should open up some new avenues in terms of the analysis that we can then do on those documents.
So if that happens, can you give us a brief, tangible example of what would be possible, like a new business, if you like, impact that is not possible today?
That's a little bit harder for me to say, I would say. Again, like I said, things change so quickly. I'm always hesitant to make predictions in the future. I can certainly say that we're still seeing some very complex interactions in the text that we are now analyzing. And we have to use a lot of heuristics to make the connections across the document. You extract some information from one place, you match it up with information in another place, and you try to create some rules around how those interact. Potentially having algorithms that can process entire documents, we might be able to just give it the right training data and get to that way, which is sort of the holy grail of machine learning, right? Is just learn from the data and inject as little as possible human knowledge beyond the data. It's really hard for me to say sort of what would be the business impact necessarily of that, but it will create some new opportunities in terms of what we can do.
I wanted to thank our audience for being here today. And this was a very interesting talk and looking at the perspective of large companies and how artificial intelligence is being integrated into some of their processes. If you have questions about this particular episode, please reach out to me or comment below. And if you have suggestions for future talks, please just reach out to me or comment below again. So for the time being, Ofer, thank you so much. This was so interesting talking to you today. Thank you for being here.
My pleasure. Thank you, Paolo.